Somewhere over a year ago, I did my first wiring job for this boat. I actually dropped a video on it, and it became a very successful video because it showed everybody a very simplistic layout through animated diagrams and schematics on how to run complex wiring and make all your electronics work, especially if you're building a boat from scratch. But now, I'm going to show you how to do it efficiently. I'm going to add part 2 of that video and show you how to have the best layout, the most efficient layout, to make your own switch panel, configure it however you want, and then just simply drop it in your boat to connect all of your wiring. All the convolution is going to be simplified here through a very in-depth step-by-step video. We find better ways to kind of hide, clean up the wire, run better conduits, run it all through here, get it all organized so that when you finish your boat completion, you don't see any excess wiring anywhere. You know where to troubleshoot it, you know where to trace it. And in the midst of creating this layout, I added some new ideas, some new things, and brought forth some new products that I think you will all love. They're epic, and they're all starting now. This carbon rack block of wood was my initial switch panel layout in my boat. It was rushed, you can tell. We're going to upgrade it and kind of just throw it back in there. For starters, that little cheap switch I have in my hand, we got rid of those, and we stuck in some marine grade 3-prong switches. The 3-prong switches will give you power through plus an LED. The 2 prongs closest to each other are for the power, and the left adjacent prong away from the other 2 is for the ground, which activates the LED. You actually don't need to power that one unless you want the LED. We're running 2 fused block bus bar combos this time, one specifically for all the LEDs, and the other one is specifically for the fish finder, because when I ran both off the same bus bar lead, you could see the obvious interference in both the lights and both for the fish finder. This is a version of, it's not really a new dry hatch system. It's been used before. Nate Echold has used it in his past builds. And what it does is it just diverts standing water instead of fully bleeding it out like my previous generations. It is vastly simpler to do. In fact, I bent that around. You don't even need to do that. You just need to cut it and, you know, seam it up together very evenly and seal off the ends. And this is actually a really effective dry hatch system. It complements how most people try to frame their boats. They try to frame it right around the totes or right around the wood frame. Dry hatch will vastly improve your quality of fishing and your boating experience. I can't think of anything more annoying than water seeping into these hatches, and whether it's your baits or whether it's your clothes or your like specific stuff that you really don't want to get wet, dry hatches are everything. So I have my boat about a 50-50 split with this system. 50% of them are like true bleed outs, and then like 50% of them are all smaller hatches like this to divert standing water. The bigger thing about this one is you can do it to small hatches. Like the full bleed out systems that I've been doing, you can really only do those to so many hatches. It's super hard to do them to H hatch on the boat because of, you know, the space area. Like generations 3 through 5 needed a lot of space in order for you to make full bleed out systems around them. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to run a side-by-side unit. You can also run this in one big long unit. The side-by-side is going to be more efficient for what I'm going to try to do. Right now, after I mounted in that bus bar combo, I am drilling holes adjacent that mimic each side of where I'm going to run wires. So I have those 6 leads right there for the ground. I'm running 6 holes adjacent to run wires underneath the panel to those leads. I got the idea from Nate to run little grommets. I've never ran them before. The idea is that over time, they'll absolutely stop any sort of fraying on the wire through the bottom aluminum panel. Before I was running wood bottoms, so I didn't even need to use grommets, but this time I was kind of a little paranoid, so I put them everywhere. They look clean. They were a pain to install, but whatever. You can get these at Harbor Freight. I got a little box kit for them. You can also get them on our store. We have a link directly in the description below and also pinned in the comment section of this video. I didn't get video of the installation of that cutoff switch right in the middle of those switches, but you need one. Or maybe 2. You can run multiple ones depending on size. But right now is where we start to run the wiring loops. I just cut some random pieces of wire, some random stuff that I had on extra that I've been keeping around. And we're just going to use these as leads. We're using the ring connectors for each of these. That's actually 10 gauge wire. And those will be running directly to the power leads themselves that are powering the entire fuse blocks. We'll be running bigger amp fuses on those by themselves. We're going to take care of those because those need to be routed first before we start running any of the other wires. I ran the power leads on the outside, and then the inner terminals will be running, those will be running the ground leads. So we're kind of trying to uniform together, so later on when we flip this panel over, we can kind of snake them and grommet them and kind of, you know, wire tie them or loom them in a way that'll flow, so everything underneath there is organized. Now that we've connected the major power and ground leads, we can start to run the rest of the leads from the switches to the fuse blocks themselves. We're using 14 gauge Anchor Marine wire. Some people use 16 gauge, but it's all marine grade wire. You cannot go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get wire from there and hope to expect the same results long-term over time. That wire will fail, and after you see everything we do, you're definitely not going to want any of your wire to fail. You want marine grade wire. Anchor's like a household name in the marine industry. It's the most widely used, and that's why I'm demoing it here on my video. Now that that's all done, we can start running the leads that we just ran from the fuse block to the switches themselves. It's easier to do it from the fuse block to the switches because then you can have a cleaner layout for the fuse block on the top. If you notice, before we flipped it over, that you can barely see the wire. The wires are going to kind of stick out of the fuse block, kind of like it's going to look like a bug or a fat beetle. But really, the wires you see there are very, very minimal. Most of the wire convolution is going to be maintained underneath the panel. We're running fairly loosely. They're not completely tight. They're going to have some play because later on we're going to kind of link all the wires together and then secure them out of the way with a kind of a wire fastener. So they run kind of seamlessly. And then they're out of the way when we run the rest of the wire leads, because there will be a lot of convolution once we run the rest of the wires that we connect to this panel once it drops in. And really for the ground, just so those LEDs can activate, we're going to piggyback a bunch of wires. And that's very similar to what you see when you buy like a ready-made panel that's already pre-wired. We're just doing the same, but it's only to the ground that you can get away with this. It's literally only there to power the LED. And I really do need the LED because I do most of my fishing at night. Otherwise, I don't even really think it's necessary for most people. That is the first ground wire that we run to a ground lead. Now know that the ground leads do not have to match. The ground just has to go to a ground. So we can mix match ground leads anywhere on those fuse blocks, but the power sources have to be legitimate power sources from where you need the power to come from. Those cannot just be mixed around. Bigger thing here though is those power leads we ran with a 10 gauge wire, we need to run those to the cutoff switch. So before we go any further, we need to go ahead and take care of that. Cutoff switches are really paramount because in the event of some sort of fire or mass failure with your wire, you can just completely cut power to the wire. Completely cut them. And the second line of defense is obviously the fuse blocks or the breakers, which will also be running later on. These come with covers. You can buy them completely without covers if that's your preference, but the covers give you an option to lay a sticker over the top, and we'll be using a label maker to label the wires both underneath and on the top, so troubleshooting is not a deal, because unless you have a photographic memory, it's going to be very, very hard for you to remember which wire goes where later on. This is pretty good for the initial panel. It's ready to be dropped in. Literally all the other leads are waiting for the wires to come from this big cluster we have right there on the left, ready to be weeded through and put through. So what we did is we just ran all of our accessories wherever they did. We ran all the wires knowing they were going to clump to this main spot, so they're just there. So now all I have to do is run the wires through those grommets and connect them. And then after I connect them, I can just label them. One of the things I did differently from any of the other builds is I use this braided expendable sleeving, or some people refer to it as mil-spec. I like it because it expands. If you want to run extra wires in it, later on you can, versus getting a conduit, like a PVC conduit is exact size, and the conduit has no flex, no give, and you can only run a certain amount of wires through it before it kind of seizes up and gives you problems. This stuff, it's not the same. You run fish tape through it, and as long as that stuff stretches, you can run wire through it again. So if you want to run stuff later on, you can. It's also vastly lighter than PVC piping. It's like way lighter. And so we ran that stuff for the majority of wiring conduits, and I'm pretty happy with the end result. It's going to allow us to do everything we need to do now, which is just tie all the wires through that panel. So the last section you saw, I didn't actually aluminum fit that, and that's because I was going to fit it right into that aluminum brace. I just barely had enough clearance. If you do it right, this panel should fit like a glove right where you need it to fit, and it should provide max efficiency for your entire layout. It should house all your electronics, everything very, very nicely. Because remember, max efficiency in a boat that is small is paramount. And to have a bunch of wire convolution and a bunch of other stuff just sticking out everywhere, it's the biggest headache ever. We've got it literally managed to almost no space taken up at all. Like a 2 by 2 foot section. And the rest of the wire is hidden away with looming or conduits. You can't even see it. It's all ran through the walls. And this is the only thing that takes a little bit of time. Just taking the time to make sure the wires are fit correctly, linked correctly, making sure you correctly shrink all the heat shrink connectors without burning the rest of your stuff with a heat gun. I would vastly recommend a heat gun. You can get like a $30 Wagner heat gun from the local hardware store. I would also recommend like that Velcro wire tie stuff. They have it right next to all the zip ties. It's way better. You can adjust and readjust. I ended up having to cut all those zip ties off later. In here, I had to route a bunch of extra lights to my hatches. And because I'm retrofitting that layout to a frame that was already put in, a lot of people are not going to want to gut an entire boat and then redo the whole thing from scratch. So you're going to have to retrofit stuff where you can. I don't know what these are called. They're also at Harbor Freight, likely in any section where there's electric in a store. They're just, I don't know what they're called, wire ties, wire fasteners. I don't know. They're like this plastic little thing that loops around the wire and you can secure it with a screw. And they're immensely helpful. I have those throughout the boat in sections where I needed to retrofit wiring to run to the main lead for the panel. And another thing I would vastly recommend, get a label maker. It only has to last one job. Get the cheapest, crappiest label maker that you can find and label all your wires. Not only label on the top of the panel where the fuses are, but label your wires individually. That way later on you have to like troubleshoot a lead. You can literally look underneath here and find it. Otherwise, you'll never find it. It'll be a miserable process. Half the reason I ripped my entire panel out for this project was because I could not find where the wires went and I could not remember, and it was going to be a ridiculous amount of work to trace the wires. So I just gutted it all and redid it here. But once we're done there, we're just connecting all the power leads to the switches themselves. I already know where they're going to go, and because I labeled those wires before I dropped in this panel, I can literally just hook those wires to the designated switch that I want. We're hooking up all the light leads, and then the 2 main switches all the way to the right of the panel are for the bilge pumps. So there's 8 switches total. To cut down on some of the headaches, we are going to be zip tying and fastening some of these wires in clumps together. I mean, that vastly helps with headaches with like kind of the spaghetti effect, the wire convolution
Again, I would
effect.
recommend the Velcro straps because later on I had to cut off all these zip ties to run new wiring.
What a waste of money. But either way, just when you're done with the wire, when it's secured and fastened and ran to where you need it, clump it up, get it out of the way. That way it doesn't get in the way with you dealing with the rest of the wires you have to address. And vastly cuts down on headaches. Also, the label maker cuts down on headaches. Not my cleanest work there, but I absolutely can troubleshoot anything I need to at any moment in time. I would compare not being prepared for a wire failure on your boat equal to like losing your personal best fish. That's how painfully stressful it is when something on your boat goes out electrically. But if your panel's good, you can run additional leads anywhere you want. Like this project here. I had this notion to do this after I dropped my panel in. But I could do it because I knew where everything was going to go. And I knew I could hide everything effectively. I just had to be very crafty, which where, you know, hide the wires wherever you need to hide them. Just put them in a place where they're not going to be vastly seen, not exposed constantly to UV light, not going to be fraying or rubbing against parts of the frame or a knife edge. The next step here is to make a series of panels that I can mount stuff to. For one, I took out my live well, so I'm going to make an interface for a portable live well that's going to have portable water in it and power jacks that the system could just connect through, and I can take that seamlessly in and out. The other system I'm going to run for a panel is something to hold my 3D structure scan units, and there's no good place for that thing in this boat, so I'm going to make a place for it. We're going to attach that thing along this seamless part of this wall. This wall is literally going to house all the wiring and all, and it's going to have panels that are going to be, you're going to be able to access all these units and run it through. All this will be hidden after we kind of secure it so it doesn't, bunch up everywhere. All this will just be hidden underneath this one panel that we're going to make for the entire locker. We'll have it a 2-panel switch up so we can access the 3D structure scan, or we can access anything underneath the panel itself to troubleshoot it. Got to go through a few different links to make the wall here, but whatever. I ended up running this boat in a way how I framed it to get rid of all the distortion overlay. I know it's getting a little bit off topic, but it did help in the eventual layout of how I had to do everything here. Before we get too far into it, we need to run all the jacks and the ports for the eventual project we will have of making a portable live well system. I used a Flow-Rite Quick Connect because I plan on using all Flow-Rite parts when I make the other side, and then I use cable glands to hold in these connectors. This is an experimental design. I used what I had. Some people said it's going to do great, some people said it's going to fail. We will find out in the upcoming weeks how well that thing actually does. If it doesn't work, at the very least, I get to show you here how to make a recessed panel that you can stick your fuse block or your switch panel or both on the side by bending an angle and having in its own compartment. Once we had all the paneling done, we are now going to install rivet nuts in sections where we really need to access this. I did use some odd methods to get some of them in because I couldn't get a rivet nut tool in there. And so that was just whatever it was. But these rivet nuts will allow me to use 1024 screws to undo the panel. If we use just standard screws inside the aluminum, they'll eventually strip out and weaken and not do well. And now what I'm really excited to bring you is this stuff called Gator Skin Soft Touch. It is a complete neoprene rubber layout with UV inhibitors. It is just like the regular Gator Skins, but it is a fraction of the size. It's literally maybe 1/4 the thickness, and that gives you an insane amount of fabrication edge here to mount it and twist it and bend it around anything you literally want. It'll wrap around a piece of sheet metal like nothing, and it'll stay that way as long as you prep the surface right. Link for this stuff is also in the description and comment section below if you want to check it out. If you're wondering how this entire layout worked, it worked out fantastic. This is not the first time I put this layout in a boat. I refined it very much in the last boat I did for 1448 Jon Boat. And before that, I had a few running versions of that side-by-side panel in some other boats. All of them worked really well, but this is the best one that I've actually ever put in. The most solid and the best managing. And I'm glad to bring it to you, and I'm glad that I'm able to bring it to you in my boat. Stay tuned for the rest. Stay tuned for a lot of other cool stuff coming on this one, as well as another project I can't wait to show you. Stay tuned for the end reveal. Tight lines, guys. Stay safe out there. Peace.